Welcome back to Fundamentally Different, the podcast where we explore fresh thinking and practical solutions to some of the toughest challenges facing public services. In this episode, we'll focus on school readiness and what it really means to help children thrive from the very start. Across the Liverpool City region, more and more children are starting school without the emotional, social and developmental building blocks they need to succeed. Poverty, health inequalities, housing pressures and stretched services all play a part. But alongside these challenges, there are also promising sides of progress, new ways of working that are more holistic, more family-centred and more collaborative across services. Today, we're joined by three people at the very heart of this work. Louise Cheetham, Early Years Team Leader at Sefton Council, leading efforts to improve school readiness across the borough. Jen Teasdale, Early Years Service Manager at Sefton Council, shaping strategy and support for families across early years settings. And Helen Pruden, Operational Manager in Sefton Health Visiting Service at Mersey NHS Foundation Trust. Together, we'll explore what school readiness should really mean and how families, services and communities can help every child get the best possible start. Okay, so let's make a start with really unpacking what school readiness actually really means. Is it just about literacy and sitting still, or is there a much bigger picture here, like confidence, play, well-being, family life? Louise, how would you describe school readiness?
Okay, so this is an area where we've done an awful lot of work, probably in the last 18 months to 2 years. And a real key starting point for us in this work was to challenge that term school readiness, because we felt that this implies that there is a certain perception of what school readiness looks like. And we know a lot of our children are coming in to school, and by school we mean reception class, and they may be not ready for school. And by this point, it's too late for us to intervene and change this trajectory for children. So we really wanted to redefine this term, really, and we now refer to this as being ready to learn. And there is a really strong emphasis that children are ready to learn when they are even in utero. This is from that very, very beginning point. And children are ready to learn at every stage of their development. So by shifting and changing that phrase, it implies, that every opportunity is a learning opportunity. We don't stop learning, and we're not just getting ready for reception in those vital childhood years. It is much more important that we focus on giving children key skills that they need to be successful lifelong learners.
Okay, so just, I guess, what I'm hearing there is that it feels like this term school readiness has been around being ready for reception.
Yes.
And we are trying to disrupt some of the thinking there.
Absolutely.
So I guess just taking us a couple of steps back from that, like what was showing up as the problems to make school readiness something that we need to even think about. So yeah, what was showing up as why this needs to be on the agenda, Jen?
So I think for us, it was the sector that was telling us. So when children were attending reception at those first early weeks, there was things that school teachers were finding that children were unable to do. So those basic skills of being able to interact with a peer, so be able to share those toys, being able to independently go to the toilet, perhaps find a coat, be able to understand that those shoes are their shoes and what do they do to access them. And I think the sector really were concerned about not the academics. I think that's the worry for us, is that the term school readiness to the general public seems more like an academic focus. So actually, do we understand that it's not about children not being able to know the colours, their name, the shapes, the alphabet? It's actually fundamental skills that they're lacking about, resilience, being able to even be left without a parent. So actually being able to have that a attachment with another caregiver that isn't their parents. Those skills are the things that we want children to be prepared for, because they're the things that focus children to learn. So all of those other things about phonics and being able to write and hold a pen will come in time. But actually, if they don't have those fundamental skills of being able to listen and attend in a group, that's the things for us that we were hearing from the sector and are seeing sort of on a daily basis when we go into the sector.
Okay, so that was the insight that you're hearing from education.
Yeah.
So Helen, to kind of bring you in more from a health lens.
Yeah.
How is that showing up in your line of work?
Well, with the health visiting service, we deliver the Healthy Child programme, which is core contacts from pregnancy and throughout. But the last sort of core contact at the moment is the 2-year review. So what we've found in Sefton is that a lot of children were at the expected stage at their 2-year review. We deliver that between 2 and 2.5. But then between that contact and going to school, we don't routinely see every child at the moment. So what happens is then they go to school and then they were finding that actually they're not toilet trained. Some of them were still having dummies, which obviously impacts their speech. They're not able to communicate effectively, which puts barriers in place for them in school. So what we've been doing as part of the partnership in Sefton is looking at how we can bridge that gap between the 2-year review and then going to school. So one of the things we're implementing from the Sefton Health Visiting team is a 3-year contact as well. So it's about contacting parents and saying, look, we've developed a leaflet to say this is your child at 3. This is kind of what we'd be expecting them to do. And then if they're not doing that, reach out for support. So then we can put some intervention in, between that sort of age 2 and going to school. But we've also, within the health visiting service, looking at what we can do as a health service to promote that real ready to learn right from utero. So things like people don't realise always that, when an unborn baby, if you sing or read a book to an unborn baby, that is really beneficial to their development, their language development. So I think it's getting those key messages out to parents and families to say, these are the things you can do at home, because ultimately being ready to learn begins at home. So, it's having a home learning environment where you might look at books, you're reducing screen time. That is a big issue at the moment where, society, we're using our screens more and more, aren't we? And it's something that we are seeing with children, but that's then taking them away from outdoor play. It's taking them away from crafts. It's taking them away from books, like we've said, all these things that can support their development. So it's just about getting those key messages out to families at every contact that we do.
Okay. So we kind of started off, or there might be an opinion that school readiness is knowing your colours, knowing your shapes. And it sounds like, you're starting to think about what does that really mean and what does that really mean here. Where have you got to with trying to kind of define what that is?
Okay, so we work on the ground every day in schools and in PVI settings and with childminders. And it was a case really of really tuning into the voice of the sector to really go in and see firsthand the challenges that early educators are facing at the moment. And the way I describe it is it's almost like the perfect storm at the moment. So if you imagine a typical reception class with 30 children within it, we have potentially 3 groups of children in that class. We have children who come to school with a range of skills, lots of different learning behaviours. They're able to listen. They've got a vast vocabulary, lots of language. They've got good social skills. They know how to play. And those children are ready to learn. They're ready to thrive. Then we've got another group of children, as everybody is aware, we are seeing a rise in children with complex needs and children with special educational needs and disabilities. And then we've got a third group of children. And this group of children are the ones who maybe are not ready to learn. So all those things that Jen mentioned, they find really, really difficult. And that is hard. That's hard for everybody. Legally, and following the statutory guidance, reception teachers the ratio is 1:30. So there could be one reception teacher in that class with 30 children with all these different needs. And that is a challenge for the children who are in there, for all the children. That is a challenge for the teacher. And we're seeing that with recruitment and retention rates. We're losing excellent teachers because it's really, really tough. And it's hard for families and parents as well. You know, they've got this idea in their head of what it's going to be like when their child starts reception. And if their child is finding it really difficult every single day, they're not going to want to go to school, are they? And they're going to lose that love and that joy that they have of learning and very, very quickly, which is really, really worrying. So following that, we've collected some data and we identified 6 particular areas where children are struggling. And from that, we devised our 6 steps to success.
Okay.
So these 6 steps focus on the key skills and the dispositions that we would really like our children to have. So it's things like communicating, being able to talk about their wants and needs, being able to play with others and share a workspace, being aware of their own feelings, being independent, and being able to listen and follow very, very simple instructions. And we're really focusing on showing what that looks like at every stage of development. So what does listening look like when you're in utero?
Yeah.
You know, when does the unborn baby's ears develop? When can they start to hear and be exposed to all that amazing language that we can give them? What does it look like for a 1-year-old, for a 2-year-old, for a 3-year-old? And we're working really, really hard to get this out to educators, families, and other professionals to make sure that there's a real consistent approach in Sefton.
Okay. I think the statistic that I've heard is like something like 40% of children aren't school ready. What's getting in the way of that? What are the drivers behind it? Some of them are big ticket stuff. Jen, what do you think some of those things are?
I think it's really tricky to define it down to sort of a few things. I think there's many different things, isn't there? Helen spoke earlier around the rate of change in technology and the rapid pace that we use technology now and the access that children have at a younger age. For us as educators, technology has its great advantages in, opening the world to children, but actually as a communication tool, it's very limiting. That back and forth conversation doesn't happen with a tablet or a phone. It's very much centered on sort of you watching, and it's a bit of a cause and effect. So definitely I think technology has a role to play in the way we change our communication and our interactions with children. And I think there's many other things in terms of, an understanding of child development as well. So I think children have changed over, the last 5 to 10 years. The way society sort of engages with young children has changed as well. And I think we're not necessarily understanding children of today, we call it, of how children have changed or developed, and understanding the rate of child development now to maybe how it was 10 years ago.
What is different?
I think the way, I think just our expectations of children are quite different. So definitely I would say generally our education system hasn't necessarily caught up with the way children are when they attend school. So actually our expectations perhaps of children who are in reception moving into year 1, completely into key stage 1, is higher than actually children necessarily that we're presented with.
I see.
So maybe our curriculum hasn't changed enough to sort of support those children. I think as well that support around the family is not necessarily how it was maybe 10 years ago. The connections that people have with, family or friends perhaps isn't as strong. We're definitely doing some work around our parent and toddler groups to look at how many still exist after COVID and how well they're used and what happens within them, because that's a place for us to tap into and try and get families and young parents or parents with young children together to really start to build that community. Certainly when I was younger, Sure Start, and I had my children, Sure Start centres were massive, and they were a huge lifeline to me with young children. We could just go to Mersey play sessions and there was 20 other people who had young children the same age as me, and being able to just have a dialogue about, oh my goodness, the sleep last night was dreadful, and I don't know when to come off the breast into the bottle, and they still have a dummy, and they're now 8 months old. Is that a problem? And with a peer, it's much an easier conversation than it is with a professional, and I think we've lost perhaps some of that community around families, and it's our job to investigate sort of where that's up to and how we can really bring that back together.
Okay. And, Helen, kind of bringing you in again, anything to add to what Jen was saying there around what do you think is sitting behind the, the increased number of children that aren't ready?
Yeah, so I think, as Jen said, it is very broad, and I think, there's many layers to this, and there's many external and internal factors. I think we've got to acknowledge that the children who are going to school now, when we're talking the 4 and 5 year olds, were impacted by COVID. This isn't just about COVID. I think school readiness and not being ready to learn has probably been a gradual issue that's been going on for many years. But I do think that COVID and the lockdowns has definitely had an impact, because all of a sudden parents were locked in, weren't they, with these small children and quite isolated. Families don't always tend to live in communities where they've been brought up nowadays. People move for work and different things, so they haven't got that same network around them. And then obviously you said, like I said, add a lockdown into that. It's definitely had an impact. So I think it's about now us looking at, okay, what can we learn from that? We know the negative impact of isolation. And also, like I was saying earlier, it's about getting key messages out to families and just say, actually, absolutely there's nurseries, and we know that there's, fantastic nursery provision now. There's a lot more funding, which is great to see. There's a lot more investment in the early years. However, ready to learn does begin at home. So it's about us saying, what can we learn from, COVID and being locked down? And obviously it was brand new to everybody, wasn't it? Certainly not in my lifetime being in anything like that. So it's about reflecting and saying, how can we do things differently? What can we learn from that? I definitely think that's an impact. But also, as Jen was saying, I think the rate of technology growth, it's definitely got its place and its benefits, but it's about, let's get children outside playing again. Let's get them crafting and making Play-Doh and gluing and, drawing. You see a lot of children now who are swiping with the finger when actually they need to learn the skills to hold a pencil. So it's just about, I suppose really, we've all got a responsibility as health visitors and health professionals, as education, as parents at home, as wider parent, carer, families, grandparents, aunties, uncles, everyone really. If everyone understands the importance of those early years and the key messages are shared, and we can all start working together, I do think we will bridge the gap. But it's just about how we do that. And obviously, as Louise was saying, the children who are going to school this year, it's saying, okay, those that are going in September, what can we do for that cohort of children now to support their transition to school? And then looking beyond that, further back. And certainly from the point of the health visiting service, our first contact with families is in the antenatal period, as I said earlier. So it's about those early messages and about those messages about how important it is to intervene early.
All three of you have talked about, in Sefton that the solutions for this lie beyond any one organisation. You've been living and breathing this for your careers, and you know that something needs to be different. And I think, we're still unsure of what that something is, but you've got the people on the bus. And I just wonder, Jen, where has that come from, I guess? And what do you think the right partnership looks like?
I think that, I guess the partnership working as come from that understanding of actually it doesn't just reside with us in education. And I think for us on our journey, what, you know, we've always had good relationships with health as an education system, and you know, with other council services, and probably what we've already seen from this agenda is it's wide reaching, and actually it goes much further than even what you would traditionally think of as young children's services. So actually, even things to do with, you know, further education, even adult education, possibly adult social care. You know, it isn't just an early years agenda as such, because we're trying to support families. We're trying to support parents, but their parents. We're also trying to influence people who aren't yet parents, so the younger generation. So we are really keen to ensure that everybody who at some point would come into contact with young children, or maybe parents themselves or grandparents, has a say in what this looks like for young children and how we really make that big impact. For us, it's not just about an educational agenda. It's much more than just an education and health agenda. You know, we really need to get all those stakeholders on board. So to really get that understanding of school readiness, and actually what does that look like for individual services, individual sectors, i.e. parents, grandparents, and how can we influence them to really understand child development and pushing forward that school readiness.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't mind if I just
jump away.
I was just going to say, obviously, just building on what Jen said, I think that's a really important point, Jen. Obviously, we're talking about being ready to learn and school readiness and, you know, starting reception. But actually, I think it's, you know, society's understanding of how that impacts adult life as well. You know, we're talking about children going to reception and being able to leave their parents and, you know, having that resilience that they know they see parent or carer at the end of the day. They can hold a pencil, they can take themselves to the toilet, those things. But actually, what does that mean as an adult? If they're not ready to learn, it does have a huge impact on their outcomes later on in life. You know, it has an impact on their mental health. You know, we know that the demand on mental health services is increasing. And again, that's multifaceted, and it's certainly not all related to school readiness, but a lot of it, you know, if you look at somebody with a mental health issue and go back to their childhood, you know, I bet there's a lot of the time there will be factors within that early years that have had an impact later on in the life. So it's really important that the early years is recognised as the crucial time. You know, we know we've got the 1001 Critical Days manifesto, which talks about obviously literally from conception to 2 years and how vitally important that period is, and obviously beyond 2 years as well. But if we can get the early years right, it will have an impact, you know, throughout adult life as well.
And we've talked a lot about services, and we know they're only part of the solution. What are you hearing from parents, carers, families in all of this? And I kind of, you know, when you mentioned the 1001 days, you know, I remember sitting in a conference and being presented about that initiative, and my son had, I think, just turned 2.5, and I thought, oh, well, I've stuffed it now. Like, that's it, they're done. You know, so just bringing that real, you know, as a parent, what are you hearing from them if they are seeing that their children are not ready to learn?
You know, we know that parents want the absolute best for their children. All parents want to give their children the best start that they possibly can. And we've completed a survey recently, which we've asked parents to complete to gain a picture really of their understanding of what school ready is to them. And it did come back very, very clear actually that a lot of parents just don't know.
Okay.
And that really did flag to us the importance of us getting out these messages and supporting parents so that they do know, and just trying to really empower them, you know, and to maybe challenge that perception. It's not about children writing the names, knowing the alphabet, saying the numbers to 20. It's not about spending money. That's a big thing as well.
Yeah.
Cost of living crisis. It's about really supporting parents to know that simple things like reading to the child, going out to the park with the child, just getting on the floor and playing with their child, that is what they need. You know, I've even seen recently on social media parent packs that you can buy, and there's workbooks that you can do with your child to get them ready for school. And that is just not appropriate at all. Children learn actually all the way up till 7 through active, hands-on learning. And that is when their brains are literally lighting up. All the neurons are connecting. And these are the foundations that children need to then be able to move on and be successful. So it's really about our communication with parents from all different services. Every single person who a parent comes across in Sefton, knowing that this is what we mean by being ready to learn.
Yeah.
And I think, Louise, that was a good point you mentioned about making it simple. And, you know, it doesn't have to cost the earth, it doesn't have to cost anything, does it?
No.
And I think we do know families, as a rule, obviously not everybody, everyone's circumstances are different. But nowadays, most families have both parents that are working, don't they? You know, both parents could be working full time. They do actually get very limited time.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if it's anything like our household, it's finished work, in, bath, bed, you know, that sort of routine ready for the next day. But even just taking 5 or 10 minutes to sit with your child and look at a book, or talk to them, how was your day? Or even when you're cooking the tea, when you're chopping your veggies or whatever you might be doing, it's talking to them, or trips to the supermarket. You know, it's simple things. It doesn't have to be really adventurous. It can just be your day-to-day tasks about saying, oh, look at this, let's look at this shopping list together, what food might we need, and things like that. It's really basic, simple stuff, isn't it?
Every opportunity is a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
And every interaction shapes a child's brain. And that is profound. And it's how we share this with parents.
Yeah.
So the National Literacy Trust has found that only 50% of children are read to every day. And it's sharing these statistics and the impact of being read to every day. Why is it so important for the developing brain? I think it's also about showing what is possible. So children at age 3 should know around 300 words. By the time they are 5, they should know 2,500 words. And when we share that with parents, we're not doing that to panic them. If we do that in advance and give them lots of suggestions of how to get there, that is actually very, very achievable.
I think there is something around the research behind it, isn't it? Because I think we need to make sure that we're shoring up the things that we're suggesting. So, you know, if we're talking about reading to your baby or reading to your bump, or we're saying, you know, go outdoors and experience, but how does that impact a child? What skills will we be promoting by doing those things? And how will that secure their lifelong learning? So it's lovely things to suggest, but actually there has to be a context behind that as well, doesn't there? So there's an understanding of, you know, if I put my 5 minutes of my day into X, Y, and Z with my children, what will that bring to them, and why is it so beneficial to them?
And do you think that's the thing that's missing at the moment, understanding what some of those simple things are and the why behind them?
I think so. I think for us, that's what it feels like, you know, like I said earlier, the connectedness perhaps of the community, where you might share those suggestions and you'd sort of say, you know, have that dialogue with others who are in a similar position to you, perhaps may no longer be there. And it does feel like a missing link between, you know, the things that probably they're told, possibly even on interactions with other professionals, that these are useful things to do. It's actually the understanding of the impact of those. That's definitely some of the work that Louise has been doing on our Ready to Learn journey around, you know, at different stages of development for young children. They could do different things to promote, you know, language, for example, or communication with their child or their baby, and then the context behind what does that do, what will that promote. So there's almost a document that's useful to have, you know, that goes alongside it.
Yeah. And it's evidence-based as well, isn't it? Because I think that's a big thing, is there's so much information out there online. And as we all know, anyone can put anything out online. You know, we've got a huge generation of influencers, and, you know, the evidence, the messages they share isn't always evidence-based. So I think it's really important that parents are aware that where they're getting their information, it is evidence-based and it is accurate, and, you know, to support them in their parenting journey, because it's a minefield, isn't it? Absolutely, nowadays. Yeah.
So there's some stories to tell, some messages to land. Alongside that, what do you think are some of the biggest opportunities in Sefton for us to land that are going to really help close the gap around school readiness? Helen, if I come to you first.
Yeah, so I think some of the stuff I was talking about a little bit earlier on about that early intervention. So as I was saying, you know, with the health visiting service, we have our key contacts. So we visit in the antenatal period. We always visit babies between 10 and 14 days, then again at 6 to 8 weeks. And in Sefton, we've introduced a 3 to 4 month contact recently as well. So the idea of that is it's an additional contact between that 6 to 8 week age period and then the when the child has the 1 year development review between 9 and 12 months. And the reason we've done that is because we felt that, again, like we were talking about before, from 6 to 8 weeks to 1 year is quite a gap, isn't it? So we felt if we can get another visit in there and talk about some of these key messages, you know, around the home learning environment, around parental mental health as well. How are you feeling? You know, between 12 and 16 weeks is often the time when visitors drop off, don't they? You know, partners may go back to work, and all of a sudden as a parent, you may find yourself sort of on your own with a baby. So I think for us, that was a real key, a key time to introduce a new contact. And then we also do a 2 year development review, which I mentioned earlier. So I think for us, it's about getting those messages and just reinforcing them every time, because we know often when we go to visit parents in the early days, they're tired. They don't always take in, you know, key information. I mean, there is some research to say, I think people only take in something like 20% of what you tell them, don't they, first time. So it's about us, you know, just giving those key messages at key times and empowering the parents, really. As we were saying, you know, ready to learn begins at home. It's not all their responsibility. You know, we've got, like we said, we've got health professionals, we've got education professionals there to support, but ultimately it begins at home. And hopefully getting those key messages out, sharing that evidence-based literature, sharing the research, as Jen has said, the why are we asking you to do this, you know, and what the benefit's going to be. Hopefully then we'll start to see an improvement.
And Louise, anything to add to that?
So a really successful project that I've devised and delivered across Sefton is for educators at the moment. And this is called Lifelong Learners. And this really, really focuses on a curriculum for the child of today. And it's where we really consider all these factors, screen time, parent-child relationships, expectations of children. And this project has been extremely successful, particularly in schools and private settings. And the project also includes parent workshops, which educators can take directly back to their setting and share some of this research, some of this, really important research that parents are actually quite shocked to hear about, you know, the impact of screen time on sleep, for example. And this project comes with 4 puppets: Independent Isla, Communicating Catherine, Resilient Robert, and Learning Luke. And the puppets have really been the great success story, because how do you explain resilience to a 3-year-old, to a 4-year-old? And they learn phrases. So they say, oh, I'm resilient like Robert, because when my tower fell down, I built it up again. So that's been a real success across the education sector, and we would really love to take that further. We'd love all GP surgeries to have these puppets. You know, we'd love health to have these puppets, colleges. We've delivered to them as well, so they know what the purpose is. It's just a really kind of key vehicle to get these messages out to lots of different stakeholders.
Yeah. So just really thinking creatively about how we land some of this messaging. We are coming to the end of the podcast, but one of the things that I was hoping to finish on is what's giving you hope around how we can increase our children to be ready to learn. So Jen, I'll come to you to kick off with.
Yeah, so I think in Sefton, we're in a really fortunate position that our key leaders are really interested in the impact of school readiness on children, families, and future learning. It's not just about an early years agenda, it's actually how it shapes a community as well. So we're really fortunate so that's a great thing for us, that we know we've got buy-in, and there's a real drive from Sefton Council, and definitely for us on obviously I attend Children and Young People's Partnership Board, and there's all stakeholders from health, police, further education, all around that table, and there's real buy-in from everybody around the agenda. I think for me, one of probably the personal things that I think is really positive is at our level, in our sort of ready to learn subgroup, is the engagement of all of those stakeholders. So we've got a vast representation across all sectors, and the commitment to the agenda is just phenomenal. And it's what I think, if I'm looking strategically, what I think we need to get to with that group, and we're on that journey, is everybody understands what school readiness is and how that looks in Sefton, but also how their service shapes school readiness, and that we all understand, I understand that how midwifery fits into the ready to learn agenda, and the things that they offer parents from pre-birth, so actually even before conception possibly, and the opportunities that are offered around the messages that we give, so that we're not sort of working alone on a single agenda, that we can signpost anyone that we know to midwifery for key messages, or to health visiting, or to further education if they've got young adults who are moving into the earlier sector, or so for me, it's that excitement around a better understanding and a more aligned approach to the ready to learn agenda, and having more information and more opportunities for children and families.
Great. Louise, anything to add to that?
I think it's for me, it's the dedication of our early years educators. They are just so unbelievably passionate. They are so eager to reflect and change where change may be needed. And a real key piece of work at the moment is moving a play-based curriculum into Key Stage 1. And we've got some schools who are absolutely on this journey. And that takes away that pressure of getting all that academic in, because they have to be then ready for year 1. So it's just, we've got so many different educators and professionals who are they just want to do what's right for the children, and really, really eager to take these messages on.
Great. Some great foundations.
Absolutely.
Helen, anything else to add to that?
Just to add to really just saying, obviously from a health visiting service point of view, I think our workforce as well are really passionate. They recognise the importance of this agenda, and that partnership working that we've developed in Sefton. I mean, it's definitely one of the, it's really well attended meeting, isn't it? And I think it just shows everyone's commitment to this agenda. And in health visiting, taking it back and thinking how we could maybe change our practice to fit in more with this agenda. Is there any a different way we could do our 1 year review that would bring in some of those earlier messages? Yeah.
Okay, it feels like this is just the start of the conversation, but it also feels like you've got some of the key ingredients there. You are collectively trying to understand what it is that children need now in 2025 and for the next 10 to 20 years. It feels like the role of our community, whatever that looks like, is crucial, and feels like something that's perhaps missing. It feels like, yes, we want to equip and empower our families, but actually they're not sure what to do. So what is our responsibility in getting some real clarity around what those messages are, why they're important, and some real just practical hands-on advice as to how they can get there. You've got the people on the bus. Like, you've created this as a priority across, you've got the buy-in and you've got the practitioners, and I'm really curious to see kind of where this gets to. But that is all for today, on today's episode of Fundamentally Different. All that leaves me with is just to say a huge thank you to Louise, Jen and Helen for your time in taking part in a great conversation. To check out more around this piece of work or anything else that Capacity is doing, you can find all of that information in our show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to more Fundamentally Different podcasts on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.